Hey, we're on the air. Jason, you and I have met even though you can barely make the VUC, and the only one I know that you've been on video was when you were here.
I think I may have popped in once or twice previously, but you're right. It's probably the real appearance was while I was over there in your studio, so to speak.
So to speak, studio that you are responsible for designing in one area, the lighting.
I always have this joke about life would be really interesting if we all had a personal lighting director that followed us. So I'm glad that I could have played a
That's
part in the personal lighting direction of the studio over there.
Yeah, and it's not wasn't even expensive. For those watching this, Jason and I walked through a supermarket slash hardware store. And he said, "Oh, look!" After talking to me for like 2 days about LEDs, he said, "Oh, look,
Yeah.
they have some here." I mean, I think he's working for Auchan or wherever it is where you roll
You
those
know,
out.
I saw the shares in the obviously the root company in China that supplies those LED chips go up that day, so it was good.
And since then, I've bought them on the internet. I've bought from two different companies. Speaking of LEDs, and I mean, we have a technical audience for this, so we might as well get
Yeah.
into it. The one thing that I haven't found is that as you buy them, the connectors to interconnect them. So if you want to buy those
Mm.
ribbons that you can cut,
Yeah.
the splicing connectors, unless you want to solder, they don't. I haven't found a source where you can buy those, which have got to be worth like 3 cents each, but will sell for
Yeah.
maybe 50.
Cheapest chips.
Yeah, but I mean, anyway. So that's my
So you
next
want me
step
to
is
you want
to,
me to bring up my web store and hit you up with a link now?
yeah. See if we can find that. And also,
Cool.
they may come from the same factory, but all of them are different. So none of the connectors, they can't be connected together. I don't know. And I
You've
also
just got
bought
to be
some bars.
smart about it, I think. Yeah, there's generally, what is it, three or four connections, and make sure they're all sitting in the right order. But I've seen now, even going further than that, like the ones that we sort of put together whilst over there, they were all parallel. So you basically turn up the voltage and the lights go up, the intensity goes up. But I've seen now that they're starting to roll out. Each one has a processor in it, so you can actually individually address
Really?
each of the LED lights. So you can do things like the chasing light sequences and those
Oh
sorts of
yeah.
things. So they're starting to become a lot more available also. New wiring sequence.
So if we can get some pole dancers or lap dancers over in the living room, I should probably get those light chasing sequencers set up
Tell you what,
first.
you need more than a personal lighting director then, don't you?
Probably. I might need a good divorce lawyer for one thing. What are you drinking, Jason? What wine?
This is a Spanish red. I wish I had the bottle to show you, but yeah, it's a nice Spanish red. And the good wife said to me, "We've had that before, but it tastes so much better now that I can drink again."
Right, right. Jason, all kidding aside, you need to tell us a little bit about what you do because you're connected to the internet almost all the time and professionally. You're a
It
connected
it is a
guy.
bit like that, yeah. I mean, I'm one of those perhaps lucky people, unlucky perhaps in time zones. Very
Yeah.
lucky to feel very lucky to be here in Australia. It is so far away, obviously, and really travelling to see you and being in Bordeaux, the distances involved are obviously huge. So physical travel and obviously trying to be a little bit good to the planet and the rest of it is great. I'm never saying that
Mhm.
video would replace that, but I'm really lucky in my role, which is looking after video conferencing for an academic and research network. So it's a very high-speed network within Australia, and obviously the connections go a lot further than Australia. We do a lot with US peers and European peers as well, which led me to be in Europe during that time. So the company that I work for is ARNet, which is Australian Academic and Research Network, and I do boast sometimes that it's really quite amazing to have a gigabit basically to the desk, and not just as a LAN connection, but to see that out to the outside world as well. And Google Hangouts and the technologies that we use, certainly a lot of them are highly compressing video, and it's great to see when it doesn't look compressed and there's no latency or there's no issues with the video. But it wasn't always that way. And we've certainly come from the world of ISDN circuits delivering video, and now being able to do that on IP and do it reliably. It's not just about throwing bandwidth at it. Obviously, there's a lot of smarts in the back end that make that happen as well.
How is Australia connected to the internet? Because a lot of people have complained. First of all, they complain
Yeah.
about the rates charged for connections and phones and so on.
Mm.
But what is the connection? Because obviously there's an ocean or seas between
Mm.
Australia and the rest of the
Yeah.
world. How does that work?
There's
Cable?
there's multiple submarine cables that are the main, obviously, windows for delivery. Australia is a very large nation, so it's not that there's a single one that terminates in any single place, and certain providers by time, or they call them IRUs, indefeasible rights to use. So it's effectively a lease type arrangement on the submarine cable bandwidth, and they get cut every now and again. We've certainly seen some cases of the ones coming up, say, from Western Australia up through Europe. There's some treacherous waters that they go through. There's some interesting people that want to collect or cause damage through that area. Sometimes it should be seamless. It should automatically route that traffic around that. But certainly applications like video do suffer if you have all of that bandwidth and connectivity and it's being well used, and then all of a sudden part of that drops. So I'd hate to say the numbers because they change so quickly. Obviously, it is quite a quickly changing field in terms of the connectivity. But there's not a lot of those submarine cables feeding Australia. Certainly between US and Europe, there's some charts out there called glyph charts, which are glyph. The L in glyph is for lambda, lambda being wavelength, so it's wavelengths of light that obviously are fiber optic cables. And seeing the connectivity between the US and Europe, I mean, we're really quite a backwater in Australia, but I think we punch above our weight in terms of the technology usage, so those cables are certainly well used.
Yeah, and it's hard to picture. We know satellite's not going to do it, so it's kind of hard to picture what alternative there would be to those
Yeah.
cables. And yet, the only thing I can think of is drilling straight through the planet or something for places that are
You'd have to resist the heat of the the mantle.
exact. No, I mean, so obviously that's really actually not going to
Yeah.
work.
And
Microwave
satellite has
tunneling.
36,000 kilometers to travel, so
Yeah,
speed of light being fixed, you certainly add. You've seen the satellite interviews that are done for television. It's very difficult to give a lot of other technologies at the moment. I would never be in the field of technology and say that I think we've seen the extent of where it can go. But certainly, I think it would be a little bit difficult for us as we are now to envisage that next great leap forward, getting that technology beyond where it is with submarine cable.
that's right, Jason. Satellites are. How's my imitation of a satellite? Not enough lag, but I was
and,
afraid
and
you
back
wouldn't get the
back from
joke.
Afghanistan.
Yeah, so
You
at
had to
any
do
rate,
your CNN voice.
Australia is something like the size of the U.S. with the population of London. I read that's an old statistic, but it is a
Yeah.
vast country with lots of nothingness. Some these
Yeah.
states has a little of that too. So there's a challenge there too. How well is Australia covered by the internet? Or the population? Obviously, you're in Brisbane, I think.
That's
Uh,
right. So I'm East Coast. Population percentage figures, I think we're certainly well above the 95, 96% rate of coverage. I'd be cautious in saying high-speed broadband because that's obviously variable as to where you come from. I look at other countries, say Korea and Japan, and say what they call high-speed broadband and what we call high-speed broadband are probably
oh
quite
yeah.
different. But in general, it's DSL connections for us at the moment. But there's certainly a lot of talk about fibre to the home. We have an election this year. I've got to be careful and not be too partisan in obviously what I do as well. But there's two competing stories about how they believe they'd connect fibre to the home. And the first one is fibre to the premises, and the other one is fibre to the node. So fibre to the premises takes it all the way to your wall socket, and fibre to the node would take it to a cabinet out in the street, and then it would rely on copper to deliver that last mile. But there's certainly difficulties with both of those implementations when we have a copper network that dates back to the 60s that needs to be replaced.
Although I have the feeling that in the United States, who were kind of at the edge of technology for a long time in telephony, let's say, compared to say France here, Europe, the old world where telephones, I mean, not that many decades ago, you had to wait like 6 months to get a phone, say in a place like Paris, because they didn't have enough whatever numbers, I don't know what, copper. Um, and when the internet first came out and was getting popular, early '90s, you would talk to people kind of in the business, telecommunications business, telcos, and they would go, "Oh, it's going to be years and years before anything happens." And just before 2000, most of France was redone because it was so old. A little bit like the mobile paradigm in Africa, where they didn't have phones anyway, so mobiles took off. Well, here the internet actually did take off, and there was a massive restructuring of resources. And as a result, in the metro areas of France, there's fiber. Unfortunately, not in my street, by the way. So if anybody's
We all
listening,
want it running down our street.
oh yeah. But anyway, it's not that far. Point is, there's a couple of uh, neighborhoods where it's being offered here. But in Paris, I mean, you can get it anywhere in the city. Most of France is pretty well covered by all of that. So anyway,
Hmm.
interesting that.
I noticed that when I was there that there certainly is a great uptake and a technological love seeing IPv6 where I was staying, and it was delivered over very advanced service with IPTV. We've not really seen that degree of technical adoption in Australia. However, then when dealing with the mobile networks, as you well know, I felt that I'd taken a few steps backwards. Whereas I think in Australia, because of those distances, perhaps we've pushed very strong in high-speed internet wirelessly, and certainly that's part of the plan to fill in where fibre can't reach.
I don't know if you saw this, but just in passing, someone opened a magazine, or was this you? The magazine
I
with
think
the,
I
that
think I
was you,
shared that
wasn't
one.
it?
Yep.
That was you. Yeah,
I
I
wasn't
can't
wasn't me.
believe it.
I was sharing someone else.
Right,
So Forbes
tell us about
Forbes
that.
magazine in the US recently, as a feature, or you get those little inserts in magazines. There are something that drops out of the middle when you open them up, or
Scratch and
it's
sniff.
something stuck onto the front. That's the one, or a bandana, or a cap, or something useful. My wife loves buying them for the free makeup. But the recent one was Forbes. It wasn't even really, I guess, a technical magazine in that sense. And Microsoft had sponsored an insert in there, and it was for Office 365. And the insert was actually a fully operational wireless hotspot. So I think it was on possibly T-Mobile, if I'm not mistaken, and it was 15 days of prepaid internet connectivity with battery, and you just press the button and it goes. And I thought that we've really come a long way when that technology has reached here's 1,000 of them that we're going to ship to the local newsagent, and maybe we'll sell them, or maybe they'll sit there in the back corner. So yeah, I haven't heard too much more of it than that, but where I read that, I thought, wow, we really have come a long way with the technology.
That's amazing on many levels. It really is. And if they're going to be, MiFi's are going to be given away like those birthday cards that play music. Yeah, I'm for it. The whole ubiquitous internet thing. I mean, the internet, like anything else in the world, is 80% schlock and useless, of course. But for that 20%, that probably won't change. But for that 20%, there's just so much amazing things out there, including a lot of life-saving technology and so on. So the more it is around, the better. I'm all for either
Yeah.
ubiquitous Wi-Fi or ubiquitous mobile something.
I think
Who's
I
going
think
to
I've
pay?
heard the saying, yeah, who's going to be the one that pays, or will the advertising be so intolerable, and that'll be the way that it's paid for? I think the saying that I hear a lot of is Internet of Things, and that's one that I certainly subscribe to as a theory. I don't think it's about anymore the supercomputer in your pocket. And that's great that you have that full access to what you do have access to, but because of the pervasive nature of the technology, and because it is becoming so cheap, we're talking about Moore's law being blown out of the water basically in a lot of the technology. The recent VUC conference about Raspberry Pi, that was one of the reasons I joined in. I'm very keen in what the Raspberry Pi can do and what it can enable. People are complaining about it. They're going, yeah, it's a $35 computer, but it's $100 before you get set up. You might need a keyboard and the rest of it. I'm really glad that they've just stripped it back to a bare bone board, and you bring whatever you have to it, because I think that will encourage people to plug different stuff into it and see if it works, because it's not something out of the box that just does a particular task. It's something that comes out of the box and waits for you to connect to those things to make that Internet a thing. So it is very interesting time to be around and involved in these movements.
Now, you have a daughter that's something like 5 weeks old now, six
Yeah,
maybe?
nearly six, nearly six.
She is, how do you see her place in this technological world that we're in now? Look back for a second to your
Mm,
parents, for example. When I do
yeah,
that, I mean, life is a 360 degrees from where they were at.
yeah.
Now you and I and our families are totally connected, and maybe too much in the geekery. How is your daughter going to be fare in her 20s and 30s? What do you see? Have any visions at all?
Yeah,
I'm
I see my
technologically. I'm talking about the things we're talking
I,
about
I,
now, the
see,
geekery.
I see myself as probably not understanding a lot of that technology, and I don't think that it's actually that far around the corner that something will come out. I see, and I won't name names, but relatives around me that all they can buy is smartphones, and they struggle with that. You have to, even turning it on to the basic setting. It's I have a missed call from you. Oh, that was an SMS. Oh, it's quite a different technology, but yeah, I know that I'll be in that same place, so I'm not questioning any of that. I think the only way that I can deal with that is to really try and stretch my mind and my imagination. That's why what drives me to keep up and keep involved. In terms of her, my daughter, and where she'll be in her 20s, look, there are technologies there that we haven't even thought about, but it's all about building on those base principles. So yeah, I have I guess a strong geek ethic, and I'm glad that my wife approves of this. In fact, endorses it. But I think my daughter will be soldering very quickly, and thankfully I've been given dispensation for any burns she may encounter along the way, because that's just part of the learning process. And I think technology is the same. You do get burnt. I was reading one of the VUC, I guess it was 2009, 2010, just one of the top stories that came up, and it was talking about the Cisco Yumi. And
Oh yeah.
we get burnt. You look at these things and you go, "Wow, that's great. That's going to be amazing. It's going to really revolutionize connectivity to the home." But it just peaked too soon. There wasn't perhaps the bandwidth required, or the upstream bandwidth at least, to get that technology really singing and dancing. And if you don't have that mainstream adoption and people aren't buying it, you have that problem that we always have with video of the sound of one hand clapping. Any new standard or new technology that comes out, it's great that one set of people has them, but it really needs to cross-pollinate beyond that before it gets any sort of going back to the Forbes magazine, to be pervasive and to reach out beyond that community and become mainstream in that way.
I think you and I may have talked about this in person at one point, but the original invention of the electricity, the idea of bringing electricity into the homes, the implementation that was seen by the people who were originally working on this was that you would have one motor in the cellar, and then the energy would be transmitted mechanically by tubes. So the vacuum cleaner, there would be a shaft turning from this motor in the cellar, and you would plug the vacuum cleaner motor. There would be no motor in it, in other words. It would be one
Yeah,
centralized. A long story short, yeah, we have no idea what it's all going to be. And if you look at something like that's bleeding edge, like Google Glass,
sure.
we don't have any idea what that idea will turn into in 10, as short as 10, 5 or 10, but also 20 years. So we don't know, and this is with regard to what you're saying about the UMI or whatever that was,
Mm.
UNI, that you have to picture, did people think that there was going to be a central spot like the Big Brother with the big screen? There's that too, the whole human element of it. It isn't only the
Yeah,
bandwidth and the technology, but also like maybe in 2040, let's say, arbitrarily, or
pick an arbitrary
2030,
time. Yeah.
2030, I mean, this is easy to do. I won't be there, so
Mm.
nobody can say, haha, you're wrong. Um, maybe then we'll have that we will have the wall of the living room will be a screen. And then, when it's not a screen, it can be, I mean, it'll still be a screen showing
Mm.
beautiful landscapes or something, waterfalls, and you'll have a choice of all that. But then when you want your daughter to call you, or when she's trying to call you, that whole wall will turn into her room, and you'll be in the same room. I'm not even talking virtual, but of course that
No,
could be too.
I,
So anyway, that's
it's
that
it's interesting.
human thing that's holding us back, is the
Yeah.
paradigm, the vision that, hey, I'm sitting in my living room, my daughter calls. Of course, the audio has to be flawless, which it
It
wasn't for
does.
the devices that we had, and it was connected to your TV set. Not
Yeah.
everybody has a TV in the same room, and so on, you know. Or maybe it's going to be
There,
the
there
Google
are all
Glass
sorts
thing.
of issues as to, and even people feeling uncomfortable just sitting on the couch, being themselves, watching television with a camera sitting there. And
Yeah.
the technology hasn't quite got around that, but maybe it's more a personal technology question. You mentioned a couple of things there that I think came into confluence for me. You mentioned Google Glass, and we were talking about submarine cable before. Glass is an interesting choice of a name for the device. Obviously, they're glasses, right? And we're talking about submarine, which is fiber, which is glass. Corning, the company that makes a lot of glass and makes obviously the glass in a lot of TVs, the glass in a lot of buildings, and submarine fiber optic cable, did a
And
great
nose
video.
cones, I think, by the way, no?
Yeah, Corning into a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
They did a video called "A Day in the Life of Glass," and if you haven't seen it, certainly get into it and have a look at it. It perhaps is for some people a little bit scary, confronting, futuristic. I think that they try and paint it as a little bit more motherly than that. But future is always scary when you think it's a little bit too far fetched. For me, that sort of thing is pretty normal and natural, and maybe that's an extension of what I do. And I've read, various cultures are more comfortable in front of cameras than others, which is interesting in itself. I think some may adopt this technology. And will that help? Is it, cross-pollination of cultures? We're talking about mainstream and mass adoption. I think it will happen over time, and we'll see that flow on. But the technology now is sort of distinct from us. I mean, we can certainly wear a device, but you talk about the likes of William Gibson and those sorts of authors, and they all can't wait until they can implant a device. I think that'll be a real turning point for us. And as you said, you may or may not be here at that time frame in 2040 or 2030. There's other researchers that are saying that there are certainly generations alive today, and it might be your generation, my generation, my daughter's generation, but I think one of us, maybe all of us, could see around the corner in a very, very short amount of time that there is possibility that we don't need to, jump off this mortal coil at some point in time. And I think that will change, obviously, a lot of the technologies for quality of life at that time as well.
Absolutely. I didn't expect to talk about glass this much, but it's a perfect example of no, it's very thought-provoking stuff, and it's a perfect example of something that may well polarize people in that some people are going to, someone walks into your home, for example, with glass. Are you going to ask them to take it off? Scoble was talking about how he was on 3 flights, and nobody told him to turn it off, and so on. Well, I think that a lot of people didn't have any idea what it was, first of all.
No.
Second of all, wait. If you were the first person in the world with a smartphone and you went on a plane, there wouldn't be announcements telling everybody to turn their smartphones off because they never seen one before. So that's one thing. We really don't know what the reactions are going to be, but I can imagine that some will be very violently negative. If you're at a party or whatever, it's going to be weird, and whether everyone or most people will get used to that and accept it is something I'll be interested in watching, to tell you the truth.
It's also interesting from a operating system point of view. I think Google become, to some degree, the privacy bastions. What you will and won't be able to do as a default operating system on glass. Will you be able to look around and do an image search and match the faces that you see nearby you against the greater internet library of faces? I think that there are certain functions that will be disabled, but you just have to look at iPhone and Android devices and realize it probably won't be that far between someone jailbreaking it and making capabilities that are obviously advertised as not available as on by default. And I think that that will drive a lot of privacy. I still haven't even seen a real distinct answer to the question of will you be allowed to drive with Google Glass. And to some extent, I see a lot of people debating whether that should be allowed. You've got information being flashed up in front of you, but is that really different to something that you can buy that does a heads-up display on your car and displays that information on the screen? I do think that we do need to have some conversation about this, and it needs to be not only us techies, it needs to go beyond into the greater social conscience, because we might have a slightly different view on things that we're less worried about, or perhaps even more worried about, that it just needs to be part of that conversation before it becomes a truly mainstream product. And yeah, I'm just looking at the way that Google are handling rolling these things out, and it's certainly very interesting to see what sort of policies they'll have around releasing it to the unwashed masses, shall I say.
Yeah, and of course the price will have a lot to do with it. But it's a fascinating subject in and of itself. All the ramifications of this, we have no idea. So more down to earth, last area here. You're very, very familiar, like I am, with video conferencing technologies. Um, it would be hard for me to name, let's see, 10 hands, VC, Google, obviously. The underlying Google technology was what, video?
Video with a Y, yep.
You could throw in another few probably, but the point is you've seen probably just about everything that's there, right, in video conferencing?
That's a big call to make, because I think that when you name a name, or any of those very large players, they also have subsets of technology. Certainly, you're talking about video with a Y, and some of the others that were mentioned. They were really pushing scalable video coding, so SVC, and that was going to be, the be all and end all. And certainly, I think it's enabled certain things. For those that have not really dabbled in it, I use the analogy of an onion. You have the onion is the video signal, and you have to cram that onion down a pipe. Now, it may be a large drain pipe, and the whole onion will fit, or you may have to squeeze that down a small hose. And if you just peel off those layers, there's a smaller version of that video file that'll fit down that hose. It's just less of the onion. I think that was a big change in the quality that we see, and I have no idea what the underlying technology behind Google is now. Certainly, it was built upon that, and brands aside, because they'll come and go, the technology is what's built upon. For me, it's H323 and SIP still that we see the prevalence of, but that's really just the mechanism to set up the call. The coding that goes beyond that is really where the bread and butter developments are, and I think you see that when you talk about. I was mentioning before the LEDs that are chips that can be individually controlled. Imagine if every pixel on your screen, or that large display on the wall, was able to natively talk those codecs and not require a CPU to do that processing. I think that really changes the way that we work. But then again, it's very hard to replace that whole screen, that whole device, that one-off technology, if it's baked in to do only one thing. And there's no one golden ring to rule them all in this one case. I'm seeing HTML5 and a lot of the developments with WebRTC, they're not once again specifying a lot of that coding. It's perhaps replacing a lot of the setup and the SIP and the H323 world, or is it augmenting it? I mean, I noticed when HD video started, it was around the time that SIP was becoming a push, and the vendors really went back to what they knew, and everything became H323 again until they understood how to encapsulate that call conversation in a SIP call flow. And I think that the same will happen exactly with browsers, where the Hangouts will be able to talk to other things. As soon as you extend that capability to talk to other protocols, and yes, there's a gateway here, you make it difficult for the everyman to go and make that call. So the beauty of something like Google Hangouts is certainly yes, I see that person in my mail or my chat, and I click on them and I press the video icon, and that just works. I think that needs to happen across a multitude of technologies to really make it prevalent.
And I would add to that many of the companies that must be desperately tearing their hair out about the video conferencing companies, because of what Google is doing, because after all, as you said, anyone can sit down with 9 other people now, and there are even tricks to couple these things so that you could have more if you really needed to. And also the apps thing, which is supposed to be 15 seats. We'll be trying that tomorrow, and maybe you'll join us for that. But they're actually, Google in a sense is doing all those companies a favor. Should the companies survive this push and offer paid services, people will have gotten used to the possibility of these multiple conferences, because in the beginning it was very hard. And this is yet another, like Glass, this is another technology that I've been watching since its inception. And the Hangouts, a lot of people were very, very shy and didn't want shy of Hangouts. I mean, not shy personally. Didn't want to be filmed, didn't want to turn their cameras on, and so on. And I see a definite movement towards people going out and buying new webcams because theirs are
Mm.
crap, and getting really into this. And we don't know a lot of the private Hangouts. We don't know what goes on. I mean, there could be a
No.
whole cottage porn industry for all I
Does,
know.
does anyone know? I don't know.
Even though that's illegal. But the point is, Google deserves kudos for that too, and hopefully they will get credit for the demystification of video conferencing. Just call it a Hangout, and it's no longer a video conference, and it's not scary anymore.
I think another interesting part is, you mentioned everyone jumps out and grabs the new camera. I read a great line the other day, which was, you really don't want to be the VGA participant in a high-def conversation.
Exactly.
We've gone that long way where you just go, oh, I'm embarrassed to have this, standard definition camera now. Oh, okay, I have to go and get new technology. That's great for the vendors. But I've noticed, especially participating in the VUC sessions, and maybe more as an observer on some of them, but all the VoIP guys are wearing either earphones or headsets, and that's certainly the notice that I give to a lot of my users, that I think the holy grail is really getting that audio capture right and getting full duplex, but being able to do that without wearing a headset. I think a lot of people are still uncomfortable. They're comfortable in front of the camera, but they're still a little uncomfortable even putting the earbud in. They want to have that I'm talking to you face-to-face experience, and you really don't even get that when you've got one ear with the audio coming through. We're perhaps a little bit more used to it because we've come from that audio background, and certainly to get audio capture right, you want to have the mic as close to you as possible. But I think the smarts will go into laptops and to other devices where it will be able to spit that audio out at you and capture at the same time and filter those two, so it's not getting any feedback and matrixing them together.
Yeah, well, now that there's a compelling reason, that is that everybody's doing Hangouts and video conferencing, it's going to be a very integral part of business and personal life. So there's going to be even more movement towards optimizing it, and probably in 5 years when we have this conversation, in the 13th year of the VUC, there'll be a lot to report.
Look, line me up, put a calendar invite now. I don't know what protocol we'll be using for calendaring then, but let's do it.
Really? Okay. Jason, I hope to see you and yours tomorrow night, but if not, we'll see you soon.
Certainly. Thanks, Randy. Appreciate it.
Thanks for participating, and thanks for getting me into those weird conference technologies.
Look, there's always going to be a new one around the corner, and I need a guinea pig in a different time zone, so I can do them at weird times of day too. So appreciate your help too.
All right. Take care, buddy.